long. Nothing else I can think of. But that large mountain standing up right in the center of the canyon was named over 160 years ago by the immigrants and pioneers. They named that mountain Sugarloaf. And after crossing the great 40-mile desert and coming up through the Carson Plains, the easiest way to get to Virginia City was to come through 6 Mile Canyon. When they did once they saw Sugarloaf Mountain, they knew they were near their destination and hopefully a better life. Now folks, once we clear the coaches of our Carson City train, if you look off the east side of the train across the narrow canyon next to us, atop that huge pile of tailings, you'll see the remains of the combination shaft. The combination shaft at one time was the deepest mine in the world. Still, to this day, that shaft goes straight down 3,265 feet into the earth, about 2/3 of a mile. The combination shaft was a joint mining effort between 4 mining companies on the Comstock Lode. In their wisdom, they thought a main vein of ore existed directly under that spot, and if they sunk that mine shaft there, they would surely all become very rich. But folks, there was a problem. There was no main vein of ore. That shaft only brought up some very low-grade ore. It was eventually declared a $7 billion financial disaster. Passing under a 150-year-old ore trestle. This is how ore was brought from mines on the west side of the rails over to the crusher on the east side. Now, folks, as we go underneath this trestle, I'd like you to take a look at those large rocks laying on the ground under it. Those large rocks laying there are actual gold and silver ore that is laid on the ground a century and a half. Now, the reason these rocks are on the ground is when they brought the ore across this trestle, if a rock was to go through the crusher machinery, well, folks, they just push that rock right off the top of the trestle. So if any of you folks are feeling a little bit lucky today, come on back later with a great big hammer. You can go to work on one of these rocks, and you might just strike your fortune. Folks, I'm pretty sure it's a little bit luckier than a slot machine. Not much, but a little bit.
These rocks here?
When mining began on the Comstock Lode around 1860, the only way to get the ore down to the mills on the Carson River was by wagon and mule. It was very expensive, and it took over a week for a wagon load of ore to make it down the mountains. In 1869, a man named William Sharon on the board of directors of the Bank of California thought it would be profitable for that bank to build a railroad between Carson City and Virginia City. Construction began in February 1869 with 1,500 workers employed to build the line. Coming the 21 miles from Carson City to Virginia City, 7 tunnels were dug through the Washoe Mountains, and the railroad comes up nearly 1,800 feet in altitude, making us one of America's true mountain railroads. Coming through those canyons, the railroad makes enough twists, turns, and bends that it equals 18 complete circles before arriving here in town, giving us the nickname the quickest railroad in the world. It took 11 months to build this railroad. The first passengers were unloaded in Virginia City in January 1870. folks, in just a couple of moments, we're going to be passing underneath the Highway 341 overpass. Now, one time, this was tunnel number 5 of those 7 tunnels between Carson City and Virginia City. When the highway was built in 1932, they took the whole top of that mountain off and did what's called daylight the tunnel. Now, folks, that worked out pretty well. If you want to take a look down there, you'll see it is daylight now. But there is something we've always had a question about. As we go underneath that bridge, take a look at those great big steel columns beneath it. You might notice the same thing we did. Those great big steel columns don't even touch that bridge at all. Now, that might be something we should discuss with the highway department. Then again, it could have been a government job. Once we go underneath this overpass and clear it off the east side of the train, you'll see the remains of the foundation of the Ward Bullion Shaft. Now, the Ward Bullion Shaft goes down 2,500 feet into the earth. The two owners of this shaft never brought much ore up out of it, and what they did bring up, well, it was very low-grade ore. They never made very much money off this shaft at all. But folks, they were a couple of pretty clever fellas. So they sat down one evening, poured themselves a drink, and started thinking, how could they make a little bit of money off this shaft? Well, folks, they came up with an idea. They started the rumor on the San Francisco Stock Exchange that the Ward Bullion Shaft was about to hit the big bonanza. Well, folks, in gold country in the 1870s, when rumors like that started, investors came very quickly. In 3 weeks' time, more than $3.6 million was invested in stock in the Ward Bullion Shaft. And as soon as all that money cleared the San Francisco Stock Exchange and ended up as cash in those two fellas' pockets, well, folks, at that time, those two fellas just sat back and smiled and declared this shaft a bust and closed it. Oh, don't feel too bad now for all those people who lost all their money investing in it. They all did get something. They all got the shaft. Ah, ha, ha. Well, folks, if you'll take a look down into one of our beautiful Nevada canyons, in the early morning hours, you often see a lot of the wildlife that roam here.
Come on this side.
We do have those herds of wild mustangs, and of course, we're very proud of them. We also have a lot of coyote, mule deer, black-tailed deer, jackrabbits, cottontails. We've got the cutest ground squirrels this side of the Sierra Nevada.
I love squirrels.
We've got the red-tailed hawk and the California quail. And we've got the bad boys of the desert as well, the Great Basin rattlesnake, some mountain lion, and some bobcat. And you might notice that there are no lumber-producing trees in the Washoe Mountains. Well, folks, we are in an area called high desert at over 6,200 feet in altitude. There's very little water up here to support that type of growth. All the lumber for the mines, mills, homes, and businesses came from the beautiful Sierra Nevada mountains, and most all of that was brought here by the Virginia and Truckee Railroad. The trees you do see growing here, the larger one is the pinyon pine, one of Nevada's state trees. The smaller, lighter-colored tree is the mountain juniper. You folks smell that little scent in the air? Can you smell that? That's called clean air. Feel free to enjoy all you like and even bottle some home up and take it home with you. We do have plenty. Now, coming around the next little curve off the east side of the train on the bluff nearest us, you'll see the remains of the East Yellow Jacket mine. Now, the East Yellow Jacket mine was one of the highest producing mines on the Comstock Lode. It's also the site of the greatest disaster ever on the Comstock. In late 1869, a fire broke out at the 800-foot level in this shaft. It took the lives of 39 miners. Eventually, they were able to recover 34 of those poor souls, but folks, 5 of them were never found. They probably are still at the bottom of that shaft even today. Now, folks, we're about to enter tunnel number 4. For those of you folks who are afraid of the dark, when
Tunnel.
we go through the tunnel, please close your eyes. Tunnel number 4 is 436 feet long from end to end. It took those workers in 1869 2.5 months to dig this tunnel through solid rock with pick and shovel only.
Pick and shovel only.
Now those miners that worked on the Comstock Road were a pretty tough bunch. They had a nickname at that time. They were called muckers, and that was a name of respect for them. They would work in those mines 6 days a week, 8 hours a day, in temperatures around 120 degrees at the lower levels. Now at those temperatures, they could only work about 15 minutes at a time. Then they would have to proceed upward in the main shaft and off the side in what was called a drift. At the end of that drift, they kept ice and cold water. They cooled out a little bit, then go back to work for about 15 minutes more. Now, during that period of time, miners around the world made about 80 cents a day for their labor. Miners on the Comstock Lode were in such high demand, they became the highest paid miners in the world at $4 a day. Now, folks, that's the equivalent of $54 an hour now. At the end of their shift, they could go to Virginia City. They could order a 2-inch thick steak weighing about 2 pounds and a great big plate of beans. And folks, that meal would cost them about 40 cents.
Spend another 20 cents on a little sweetie and call it a day. Another 20 cents on a hotel
Now, coming
room.
around the curve here, we're going to be looking down into Gold Canyon over the town of Gold Hill. Coming into view down in the canyon, the large steel roof building you'll see down there at one time was the Crown Point Mill. Now, the functions of the mills on the Comstock was to crush that ore rock into near dust.
Is that a little
That
cemetery
dust
right there? Look,
would then be
little
taken
one.
down to the processing plants on the Carson River, where the gold and silver would be extracted by the mercury or cyanide recovery process. Coming into view down in the canyon, you'll see the Gold Hill Hotel and Saloon, the oldest operating hotel in Nevada. It opened in 1859 as a tent saloon.
We ate there
The
for
stone
dinner.
hotel portion you see up front was built 2 years later in 1861. Still in business today, just as it was in 1859. Now, folks, the original owners of the Gold Hill Hotel and Saloon are still dead. The brick red building with the 3 steel doors on the front of it at one time was the Bank of California. Now, this area of Gold Hill was known as the Maynard Block, one of the cash and stock exchanges along the Comstock Lode. Folks, there were days when up to $1 million would exchange hands in cash and mining stock right on that very street. Coming around the curve to the grade crossing, off the east side, you'll see the monument to the Liberty Volunteer Fire Company. Now, these were the brave volunteer firefighters that protected Gold Hill from fires in the mines and the desert. The monument is located right where the original fire hall once stood, just next to the railroad tracks. The original fire hall, well, it burned up in a fire. Grade crossing is the 1869 station the Virginia and Truckee Railroad built for the town of Gold Hill. The V&T Railroad owned and operated this railroad station from 1869 until the line to Virginia City was abandoned in 1938. At that time, the railroad sold the station and all the property around it to Story County, Nevada, for the sum of $1.
Sum of $1.
Now, coming up on the west side of the train, up on the rise, you'll see the remains of the North Yellow Jacket shaft. Now, a little bit about how it all worked, folks. That large tower you see up on the hill is called the head frame. That's what was used to hoist the ore up from the depths in large steel buckets. That ore would then be dumped down those two steep wooden chutes into what's called the ore bin at the bottom. Now, once this ore bin was sufficiently full, as we pass it, you'll see three doors on the front that would be open, and the ore would be dumped into railroad cars to be taken for crushing and processing. Something a little interesting off the east side of the train as we do pull to a stop here. If you look right over the bluff, you'll see the main head frame of the Yellow Jacket mining complex. Notice those huge wooden timbers were plastered with concrete. Well, folks, that was done in an effort to prevent that head frame from burning in the event of a fire. Now, folks, at this point, I'm going to be moving back to the center of the car for our return up to Virginia City. I do have a little bit more to show you on the way back and some things to tell you about. But if anyone has any questions at all about the Virginia and Truckee Railroad, the Comstock Lode, or any of my ex-wives, please, folks, do feel free to ask. I'll do the best I can to answer any questions for you, and I really hope you're enjoying your trip with me this morning.